I think mostly because of the big geopolitical tensions in the world at the moment. And that means that auction prices, auction results have been going down. We see it in art galleries, also in the club segment, who have had to give discounts much more than they had to do in the past. So that's a tricky moment in the top segment. At the lower segment, it's actually not much better, but for different reasons. When, for instance, here in the city of Amsterdam, where I live, when I speak to galleries, their perspective is pretty gloomy. I mean, they are not part of this international art scene, just like I would say quite a few local galleries in India are not part of that scene. And these smaller galleries, for them, it's just really hard. Even in the past years, when the international market was doing relatively well, they already had a very hard time to make ends meet. And so I would actually expect that the gallery scene in local cities like Amsterdam, but not only Amsterdam, that they will look pretty differently in decades from now. I mean, it's a model that is at the moment very hard to sustain. And then maybe one final comment. There is this imaginary, I think, with many people, that the art market, that it has been booming, and that it has been booming for a long time. And I actually think it's not true. If you look at the numbers, if you look, for instance, at the numbers which are published annually in the Art Basel art market report, what you see is that the market has, if anything, been stable for a decade now. It hasn't grown. The size of the market right now is not much more or even less than it was in the last 10 years. So there has been a boom in the market that was at the beginning of the new millennium. That was the time when globalization really took place. When we saw the integration of a number and also emergence of a number of new art markets outside of Europe and the United States. First of all, of course, China, which in no time, I mean, really within just a small number of years, became the second art market in the world. But also markets like the Indian market or the Brazilian market, or later on the local markets in Africa. That created a real growth in the international art markets between, roughly speaking, 2000 and 2008, when there was a burst of the bubble again. But at least in the first decade of the new millennium. Ever since, the market has stabilized at best. So this image that many people have that the art market is continuing to boom, it's just not correct. Back to you, Tanya.
And I mean, just to jump in, I think the idea also, as you said, Olav, is to think about markets with an S. And that's really the key to that, and to see how I think that we remember that most of the artworks in the world are traded for less than $1,000. I think that's one of the key kind of number to realize. And it's true that part of the issue is also the way people are reporting on the market. Olav gave us a good kind of grounded way, but journalists are not always interested in bringing this kind of long visions and deeper visions of things, and those record prices
are coveted by many collectors, how such a deal is structured. I think the other key thing to take into account is that especially on the higher price levels, so not the, let's say, below $1,000 prices, and Véronique is absolutely right that is where a lot of the market is. But once the prices go further up it is inevitable that that price is backed up by institutional recognition. So you cannot ask like $5,000, $10,000, let alone the much higher prices. You cannot ask them if there is nothing to show for it. If the artist doesn't have a CV where the artist has been participating in exhibitions and museums, where the artist has been seen as a credible artist by many people in the arts field. So a market never functions in an isolated way. You can only create a stable market situation if there is a much bigger context in which institutions, art critics, curators, etc., approve of the value of the artist. And only then can a stable market emerge. I have seen it happening and kind of that model of a market, I've seen it being exported or adopted, so to say, in many different geographical settings. But I mean, in slightly different ways, in what some scholars would say a localized way. It's a global model, but then it gets adjusted to local circumstances. Let me leave it there for a second and have Véronique jump in.
No, I think you summarized it really well and gave a good sense of the structure. And just adding a couple of actually facts to this, talking to gallerists also in New York, this issue of price is interesting. They would be willing, for instance, to and that speaks to Olav's points. They would be willing to give a large discount to a museum in order to make sure the work is inside the museum, and maybe play the collectors who have private money in a different way, because for the gallerist, indeed, having that piece in the museum is quite important. So this idea of creating value, not just by putting a sticker with money, a price on it, is very important. And one thing also that is always difficult for me to contextualize or even to measure is, strange ways sometimes the different values that some very famous international artists whose market function nearly more in a kind of a celebrity culture in a certain way, those top artists that we all think about, and I don't need to name, that may have more of a commercial success through their mega gallery. And I think Olav was very right to talk about the difference of the gallery and the sustainability and the challenge for the smaller gallery when we have galleries that functions like large corporation now and all over the world. So on one level, we have these kind of artists, and then there are the artists who find other sense of validation and may not be as present in that top of the market, and they get validated through major exhibition show. I mean, thinking about the French situation, the artists, while there may be very wide recognition of some French artists, the position of the contemporary French artist in the market, when we look at the global number, is not very good, despite the fact that they have strong academic and museum and institutions. So there's also a bit of a disconnect there, and it's why I know the biennales are evolving and are becoming more hybridized, and it's become more and more difficult to see what is commercial, what is not commercial. But it's important to look at this when you look at who gets, which artists get a retrospective and which is the ecosystem that supports their endeavor. Is it always the same 5 top artists who are supported by the same top galleries, or in places like, let's say, France, where the government plays a really strong role in running the arts and the contemporary arts through other means, grants and, small regional museums like the FRAC and things like this, will that value be different, and the artist kind of hierarchy different too? And maybe, Olav, you could talk a little bit about this too, in terms of what's happening in Holland and the tension between, the artists that are recognized, institutionalized by institution, and the one that are more by the market. In France, I don't think they're the same.
No, but I mean, it's hard to think of well-known artists who are only commercial. I mean, even I don't know. So when you talk about commercial artists, Véronique, what kind of art are you thinking of?
I'm thinking about the art that is collected by some of those major art collectors, the big art collectors, the kind. I mean, I would think, I don't want to make I don't want to just talk about Jeff Koons, but there's more than, there's the I would even think about Gupta as a kind of a Indian equivalent of this. When you think about, what the collection, for instance, of Pinault happened in Venice, where one year there was the balloon dog, and then the next year there was the big spiel bucket by Gupta. That kind of top international artist.
Yeah, so I wouldn't call neither Gupta nor Koons a commercial artist. Yeah. Of course, they are part of particular scenes, and they have a particular way of presenting themselves, and you may call them kind of celebrity artists.
Yeah, I think that's a better way to say it.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, if I think of Koons, his work in the development, especially in the 1980s when he came to the scene, it was a serious development in contemporary art, and of course, both of them, they have a lot of institutional support as well. I mean, their work has been exhibited in museums and has been exhibited, in the case of Gupta, in biennales. And hey, I mean, Pinault, it's an interesting. So François Pinault is a major French collector who has founded a number of private museums himself. First two in Venice, and 2 years ago, I think, in Paris as well. Which, I mean, I think is a totally fascinating phenomenon that actually my current research is very much about. And I mean, these types of people, I'm surely not cynical about it. I mean, of course, there is plenty of private museums in the Indian setting as well. And I think, actually, especially in settings like India, they have a very important role to play, because the government is just not there. How many publicly funded spaces exist where you can regularly see, let's call it cutting-edge contemporary art. I mean, I just before the session started, I confessed to Prerna that my knowledge of the Indian art scene is limited, and anyway, it's rusty. I visited New Delhi a bit more regularly a decade ago, and back then, the Kiran Museum was surely one of the places to see more exciting contemporary art exhibitions, and not in the National Museum. So there, I think private museums do have an important role to play, and I completely agree with Véronique that they may sometimes be looking at the same types of artists, and including these more celebrity artists. But hey, they're also doing really serious stuff. I mean, Pinault also hosted an incredible Luc Tuymans exhibition, a pretty serious Belgian painter, I would say one of the most important painters of today. He had this great exhibition.
He is a very fascinating character. I mean, and his collection is extremely deep too. Olav mentioned the Luc Tuymans, but last year in Paris was the Lilo Zano, for instance, and the Mirror Shore and the Judy Chicago. He has extreme interesting programmation around feminist artists that we haven't seen that much, like Mira Shaw and Lee Lozano, for instance. Sorry, Olaf, I interrupted you.
No. I was just going to wrap up by saying that for me the term commercial, it doesn't mean that much.
So what I think that actually would be a really interesting, because I always struggle with the term. How do we call these artists that are really function internationally, are attract the same kind of collector across the board, are at the same time successful in the institution, but also function in a kind of a celebrity culture? It's difficult to find a way to describe them in a concise manner.
I mean, how you did it just now, it's that's I think the way to do it. But the moment you put one label on it, it very easily becomes just a cliche, which doesn't do justice to the complexity of the situation.
I would just like to mention, if anybody in the audience has a question, please, you can either raise your hand or jump into the conversation and ask if there is any.
Any question you have always liked to hear answered about the art market, this is the moment, and we will do our best to address it.
I think Rohit has a question. Dara?
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Hello, ma'am. It's really a pleasure to hear you and hear your insight from your studies and past experiences. So I have a question. How do you perceive the interplay between cultural value and economic value within the contemporary art market?
Yeah. So that's a really good question, but also again a quite difficult one. It also depends a little bit on what you call cultural value. But my basic answer would be like this. Look, I think again the image of many people of the art market is that it doesn't do justice to cultural value. That where the market comes in a way, cultural value is driven out, quality is not being recognized. So that the market is in that sense a bit of a corrosive, a hostile force that is not able to recognize quality. And usually people would then use names like Jeff Koons, with these incredible prices up to, what was it, this top price is $80-90 million at auction. Whereas, what quality are we really talking about that here? That's, I think, the dominant image. But again, I think it is a cliche. And if you look at empirical studies, they show something different. They actually show that cultural value and economic value very often go hand in hand. I'll give you one example of a really nice study that was done, which was looking at the moment in the career of an artist that he receives the highest prices for his work, and then the moment in the career of the same artist when the works are being collected by museums. So the research was not my research, by the way. This is by an American scholar called Galenson. So he was asking himself, do museums and do the market pick out the same works of art by an artist? And the answer was, yeah, they do. They actually do. So the most expensive works that an artist makes during his career are usually the same works that the museum would like to have. And the question is, of course, why? So why do cultural value and economic value go hand in hand? My answer actually comes back to what I was saying before about how an art market needs to be embedded in a bigger context. So if a collector who is looking at a work with let's say a big price tag of like $100,000, he will only pay that price when he thinks it has cultural value and when that cultural value is more or less stable. Now, the question would be, how does he know? Well, he knows by looking at what museums are doing. And I think that is the main reason why cultural and economic value do go hand in hand. This is a bit of a simplification because at the same time you can see that there are some artists who have an incredible institutional recognition, so whose cultural value is kind of confirmed in all kinds of different ways, but where the economic value, is not that great. I mean, think of performance artists or conceptual artists whose work is just very difficult to marketize. And at the same time, you can also think of artists who have a very high economic value, but where people may raise questions about their cultural value. There are surely differences, but overall, I think those two do go hand in hand. I mean, one other very simple way to answer that is to look at the art historical canon. Also in a country like India. So what is canonized in modern Indian art? Well, let's look at the progressive artists. Yeah, it's not a coincidence that they are also among the most expensive artists in India. It is exactly because they are recognized, because they are widely seen far beyond India as having made an important contribution to modern.
Professor Véronique and Olav, I'd like to extend our sincere gratitude for having you all join us today. And you'd be happy to forward any questions from the participants to you all. And I thank all the attendees today for joining us for this conversation.